Before we get started on tonight's class, please join me in invoking Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakya Muni Buddha. Namo Shakya Muni Buddha. Namo Shakya Muni Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good evening. It's very hot. For tonight's class, as usual, we are continuing on we're still working through the first section of the Amitabha Sutra, going through the 16 Arahats, which we've completed last class. And now we're going through the much smaller list of bodhisattvas. Quang would go over 2 for tonight, and then 2 more for next class. And then we finally get into the meat of the sutra after what seems to be like a very long time. But time's illusion anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter how long it's been. It's just been. So I will let Quang Hin go ahead and start with 2 bodhisattvas, 2 first bodhisattvas. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.
Yes, as Tai Quang Tri said that we went all over the 16 Arhats in the last few classes. So now, along in the assembly of Arhats, there was the Bodhisattvas, the Mahasattvas, and the Great Bodhisattvas. So we'll first delve into the term of Bodhisattva and kind of analyze what exactly that means. The term Bodhi means enlightenment, and Sattva itself means being. So you could literally translate it as enlightenment being, or another way to translate these would be to enlighten those with sentience, to enlighten living beings, or enlightened among living beings. And in this case, enlightenment is just the opposite of confusion. It means to fully be awake in what you're doing, and you are no longer bound by the illusions of life. So much so that delusion no longer exists in a bodhisattva's life. That's where when the phenomena happens to them, they experience it as it is. They experience it clearly and they see it for what it is. There's no discriminating, there's no confusion. They just experience things as they are. If they see a flower along their walks, they just see it as a flower. If they see a trash can, they see it as a trash can. They don't hold any judgments towards these things. They just see them as they are. And then with one and every thought that is enlightened, you could say that a person has the mind of a bodhisattva. And with every thought that's confused, they are a person is just seen as a living being. It doesn't necessarily mean that a living being is a bad thing. It's just that they haven't reached that level of clarity yet. So then what separates the bodhisattva and the living being is just the lack of confusion and this discriminating that they have when they experience things. So it's said that if you see affairs and are awake, you transcend the world. But if you see affairs and are confused, you fall beneath the wheel. In this case, what it means to be awake is just to see things clearly, to experience things as they are. So when it says to be confused, you fall beneath the wheel. In this case, the grinding wheel that it's talking about is the wheel of sense objects. You get caught up in the 6 sense objects, what I'll go over, which are touch, taste, smell, sounds, sights, and objects of mind. So people will get caught up in these things, and when they get caught up in them, they start to crave these things more often. Thus, they form attachments to them. And then along with the bodhisattvas, there are the mahasattvas. And as we've gone over the previous arhats that have that prefix maha, maha itself means great. So in this case, mahasattva is just a great being. But this kind of refers to a bodhisattva that is profoundly progressed down the path of enlightenment. They've been doing this for a long time, and they're very much experienced in traversing the path. To where, to be more specific, the Mahasattva is said to have reached at least the 7th stage of the 10 stages of what are called the Bodhisattva Bhumi, where in Sanskrit, Bhumi means level, stage, or ground. So then real quickly, I'll go over what these 10 Bhumis or grounds of the Bodhisattva are. To where the first stage is the joyous. To where to be joyous, it means that one rejoices at realizing a partial aspect of truth. To where this can be seen as you just see glimpses of enlightenment. Either you see it for 1 second or a few minutes. You see what it means to be enlightened. This isn't really something that can be explained with words. It's just something that sort of happens. To where, if you want to get more specific about it, it means that a person has directly seen the perception of emptiness. They have noticed that nothing inherently exists on its own, that everything around them and everything they experience is interconnected, to where they see themselves not as separate from one another, but everybody is kind of one and one is all. The second stage is called the stainless. This means that one is free from all defilements. And defilements in this case, it means that there is no more killing, no more lying, no more sexual misconduct, no stealing, no harsh speech, no harmful intent, no wrong view, no covetousness, no divisive or mindless speech. So where if you caught on to that, the first 5 of these kind of go with the 5 precepts, which was 5 precepts for lay people are no killing, no lying, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, and no taking of intoxicants. To where in this list the defilement is, or I should say the taking of intoxicants isn't in this defilement list, but taking too many intoxicants and being mindless about that will then lead to more of these defilements, such as the harsh speech and ill intent. The third stage is the light maker, and this means that one radiates a light of wisdom. So where more specifically, this means that the Bodhisattva has perfected the cultivation of patience, and they realize that when they're getting talked down, when they're getting berated by someone, they realize that torment that they're giving other people means that they themselves are tormented in some kind of way. And they feel more of a sadness and a compassionate love towards these afflictors because they themselves are dealing with suffering. And the Bodhisattva has experienced that suffering for themselves, so it's more of they don't hate these people. They feel more concern for them. They feel they want to help them to stop these afflictions. To where the fourth stage is the radiant intellect. When this means you could say it's a radiant flame of wisdom that burns away all earthly desires. This means that beings have perfected the effort to eliminate afflictions. So this goes past defilements to where, I guess you see defilements as kind of like big things, to where afflictions are more small habits, to where they've been able to get rid of bad habits, and they're walking a more straightforward path in life. They're able to reflect on their actions and see that, this probably isn't the best way to handle the situation. This is a better way to work with this. The fifth stage is difficult to master. And this means that one surmounts the illusion of darkness or ignorance, which ignorance in Buddhism is the root of all suffering. But then also difficult to master can mean that that evildoers, they don't have a hold over the bodhisattvas, to where they don't influence them, or the bodhisattva is not easily influenced by evil ways around them. Evil could be subjective, but they're not easily persuaded to do wrong, to where they have their mind set on their goal, they have their mind set on what needs to be done, and they themselves are difficult to master from the outside. The sixth stage is the manifest. This means that the Bodhisattva has in themselves supreme wisdom begins to manifest. They are no longer disturbed by false ideas. And at this stage, they have no more attachment to the world of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. But they also do not have any more attachment to the idea of nirvana. At this stage, the person has realized that they're going to delay enlightenment to help others. So they continue in the cycle of samsara, not because of samsara in itself, but to help living beings in that cycle of samsara, and thus delaying full enlightenment and nirvana for themselves. The seventh stage is the gone afar, to where this means that one has risen above the two vehicles. And by two vehicles, this is meant by the vehicle of the Arhat and the vehicle of the Pratyeka Buddha. As we've been talking about for the last few weeks with the Arhats, we have sort of an understanding what an Arhat is, but I guess the general definition of the Arhat is they have achieved nirvana, they themselves have been liberated from the cycle of birth and death. And that's kind of as far as they go. They don't pursue Buddhahood. They finished the job, they've been liberated, and that's kind of all they've done. Though they teach people, it's not on the scale of what a Buddha would do. To where the second vehicle is the vehicle of the Pratyeka Buddha. Pratyeka Buddha is someone who finds enlightenment for themselves without a teacher. They have came to these realizations through their own experience and have pretty much enlightened themselves without having the Dharma been transmitted to them. And upon receiving this enlightenment, they do not choose to teach others to help them attain enlightenment. Though people may come up to them for advice, they more give moral guidance rather than transmitting Dharma to help people become enlightened. So then to rise above these two smaller vehicles is to reach is able to make the vow to achieve Buddhahood. As in rising above those two, they seek the great vehicle, the one of Buddhahood. And as I said before, this is the stage of the Mahasattva. The Mahasattva has now made that vow to attain Buddhahood in a future lifetime. And then the eighth stage is the immovable. Eighth stage means that one dwells deeply in the middle way and cannot be perturbed by anything. To where this is similar to the difficult to master, but there's no more going back at this point. When a person when a bodhisattva reaches this stage, that's kind of it. Buddhahood is imminent at that point. So the ninth stage is good intelligence, to where one preaches the law freely and without restriction. And this means restriction is kind of an interesting term. The way that I see it is that they're not restricted in teaching others, to where they're able to see what living beings need and what would ultimately help them achieve their goals, to where they can use the Dharma and transmit it to anyone, whether it be lowly people, whether it be highly people, whether it be really anyone, a lay person, a monastic. They know how to teach others, and they have the expedient means to do so. And finally, the last stage, the 10th stage, is the cloud of doctrine, to where this means that the bodhisattva benefits all sentient beings with the Dharma. And this is the point where there's no more discrimination. They help humans, they help non-humans, they help anything that has sentience, all the way down from little ants to heavenly beings, to where they are seen as a cloud that rains down the Dharma rain impartially on all things, as there's no discrimination, because as the cloud moves on, it doesn't go, oh, I'm going to only rain here, I'm not going to rain over there. It just rains down everywhere equally. So this is what the Bodhisattva is all about. Those 10 stages, those are the levels, to where Manjushri, which I'll talk about, and Maitreya, they're in those higher levels of in their Bodhisattva journey, to where in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha has says that both of these beings will eventually become Buddhas in a future lifetime. Where we'll start on Manjushri first. Manjushri, his name means gentle glory or soft radiance. And though he's not necessarily present in any of the Theravada Pali canon, he does appear in many Mahayana sutras. And by that, there's not really an origin story of Manjushri. He just kind of shows up in the sutras as an already enlightened being. He's kind of always been there. There's no beginning, there's no end either. And like how all the arhats that I had mentioned in the past few weeks were foremost in many superior qualities, such as wisdom or spiritual powers, like Shariputra and Mahamagdalayana had. All the bodhisattvas are foremost in some superior quality as well. And for instance, Manjushri is foremost in transcendental wisdom. More specifically, he has direct insight into the concept of emptiness. And he displays this knowledge in a lot of sutras, such as the Flower Garland Sutra and the Vimalakirti Nidesa Sutra, both in which he expounds to various audiences the concept of emptiness, which he is foremost in. So in the Flower Garland Sutra, he's a teacher on emptiness, explaining that all things, including the self, are without a fixed essence. And though this statement could be seen in a nihilistic way, as in, well, if nothing has a fixed existence, nothing really matters. But this is supposed to be more of a statement of freedom than it is of despair. It's supposed to mean that when you let go of clinging to false identities, when you let go of ideas, you're more open to what life actually is. You're more open to the ever-changing, the interconnected nature of life and how vastly luminous it is. When you live with no mask and no veil, when you don't see things as this or that, you see things as they truly are. And this isn't supposed to be a nihilistic thing. This is supposed to be an act of freedom. So in the other sutra, the Vimalakirti Nidesa Sutra, Manjushri is the only bodhisattva in the assembly that is willing to go debate a wise man. And then they debate many questions between the two of them, and one question in particular that Manjushri says to this wise man, he says, how does a bodhisattva enter non-duality? Meaning, how does someone stop seeing good and bad? How do they stop seeing big and small? How do they stop seeing black and white and just see things as they are? And to which the wise man answers Manjushri with silence. He doesn't say anything. And it's not because he doesn't know the answer to this question. It's because the silence is a more eloquent answer than any speech that he could have said. To where this exchange more subtly underlines what true understanding is. It's something that even words and concepts can't describe, because at this point of true understanding, words and concepts have to be let go of in order to realize direct insight and to see truth for what it really is. To where true understanding comes from experience firsthand and must be realized. It's not just something you know about, it's something that you have direct access, direct insight about. It's where in the past I've liked to use this example of like describing what pain or pleasure feels like. To where you say you have some person, some alien foreign being that has no pain receptors, but they also have no pleasure receptors either. But they have this profound knowledge about what pain and pleasure are, so much so that they know all the neurology of pain. They know all the psychology of pleasure. They know down to a cellular level. When something painful happens, these cells are triggered, these synapses happen, they go through the brainstem, and they perceive it in the brain as pain. They can know all this stuff, all this knowledge, but they themselves can't experience pain. Because someone that experiences pain or pleasure, it's hard to define. You can use words, but ultimately language in itself is limiting, to where you can get as close as you can to say, when I get hit with a baseball in the head, it feels like this, but without you actually getting hit, you can't experience that for yourself. Same with pleasure. You say, oh, when I eat this ice cream, it makes me feel this way. I can get close to it, but I can't exactly transmit how this feels to get hit by a baseball or to eat ice cream. So where that's with deep understanding, that's where language fails. These things must be experienced directly instead of just being told about them. So this is why Manjushri honors this wise man with his response of silence, because that silence does anything better than any words could ever say. So the Manjushri is not just a figure to look at or to venerate to, he is also a living presence of what it's like to hold the supreme wisdom and insight. And though I don't have any pictures, we don't have any statues of Manjushri here, his physical characteristics represent what it means to be truly insightful and truly wise. So where Manjushri is often seen holding a sword, whether it be he's about to attack or he has it above his head. The sword is not meant to conquer, it's not meant to dominate people. The sword is meant to cut through ignorance. It's meant to liberate people. To where, because he is foremost in wisdom and insight, that's what the sword is supposed to represent. The sword represents the wisdom to cut through the illusions of life, leaving really all that's important left behind. To where the sword is often seen on fire as well, to where the fire is seen as something that burns away illusion, but it leaves characteristics of compassion intact. To where, said when there is true wisdom, the person doesn't conquer others, but they choose to free them. To where true wisdom knows and understands suffering, so it doesn't cause suffering. It does what it can to liberate suffering. To where we've seen in Buddhism, the source of suffering is ignorance, and that's what this sword exactly does. It cuts through the ignorance in life. It cuts through the illusions and delusions that people have. To where you could say that people in life suffer not because of reality itself, but because of the way that they misperceive reality. To where people would like to see things that they want to see. They hold an expectation about what life is, what they want life to be. But oftentimes life isn't, these expectations are not held up, and this leads to a lot of suffering. So, I wanted this to happen, but this happened instead. But then to truly experience those things as they are, there's no disappointment in that, because there's no expectation in the first place. Thus, the sword is able to slice through these expectations and slice through this misperception of reality and see it for what it truly is. So where on the other hand of Manjushri, in one hand he has the sword, on the other hand he's often seen with a Sutra scroll, or he's seen with a lotus. So where the Sutra scroll is the Prajnapadamita Sutra scroll. So where, as I've said before about explaining like what pain or pleasure is, the Prajnapadamitra Sutras do the best they can to explain what emptiness is in the Buddhist context, to where it's just as close as words can get to what emptiness is without actually experiencing truly what emptiness is. So where these sutras these sutra scrolls are supposed to represent a timeless truth. To where the lotus, that's often seen with him as well, is supposed to represent purity, in the sense that a lotus seed germinates in the mud, and as it starts to sprout out its stem, it goes through the muddy water. And as it finally comes out of the water, it's unscathed by any of this mud, and it blossoms into this stainless flower. It's supposed to represent what wisdom is, and through experiencing worldly phenomena, you use this to your advantage, to where you have things happen to you, but you don't cling to them. You don't seek attachments in that worldly experience. Similar to how when the lotus flower blossoms, it doesn't have all that mud on it. Similar to how a truly wise person doesn't attach to all this worldly stuff. They don't let worldly objects and ideas cloud they don't let them cloud their ideas. So where it can be said in another way is to be truly wise is to be a person in the world but not of the world. And then Manjushri's longer name in Sanskrit is Manjushri Kama Ribata, which means Manjushri still a youth. And this is because along with his sword, his sutra scroll, and lotus, he's also depicted as a young prince. And when you look upon a statue of Manjushri, he's often seen to have a very serene and calm-looking expression. It's supposed to be more of a gentle thing, or a gentle expression rather than, I guess some people would see as someone truly wise as a stern figure, someone that's mean and old-looking. But this is supposed to represent an approachability, that true wisdom is gentle, it's alive, it's radiant. It's not stern, it doesn't try to dominate, it does more to liberate and to set people free. Where lastly, Manjushri is often seen riding a lion, so where some interpretations of this can be seen as the lion itself is this courageous, this fearless creature, to where someone with true wisdom is seen as very courageous and fearless. They're able to walk the world without being walked on by the world. But another interpretation of that is that Manjushri is often seen as riding the lion. And this can be interpreted as when you have true wisdom, you're able to pacify and tame a very wild mind. Your mind isn't running from here to there. It's not thinking these erratic thoughts. And when those thoughts do appear, you're able to pacify them. You're able to tame this lion mind. And it's and all this imagery is supposed to be stricken with deep purpose, to where when you look at Manjushri, it's not in some other religious temples where when you go up to a statue, you go and you pray to this being, the statue, to say, "Oh, I'd like these things to happen. Please do this for me." That's not necessarily the case with the symbolism of Buddhism. When you see a figure like Manjushri, when you go up and you venerate to them, you're not asking them for anything. They're more as teachers, they're more as guides, to where when you look up at him and you see the sword, you see the sutra scrolls, you're more aspiring to be like them. You're aspiring to cultivate this supreme wisdom. You're aspiring to be more like them, to be insightful about situations in your life. So when we talked about some of the arhats, I mentioned a sutra where the Buddha says, to be wise is to reflect before actions, to reflect during actions, and to reflect after actions. To where when you look at Manjushri, that's what this wisdom is, that's what this insight is to where you're always present with what you're doing. You're thinking before you do things, you're thinking while you're doing things, and when those things have happened, you're able to reflect back on them. So where I have a personal story about this. When I was in Vietnam last year, I saw a statue of Manjushri, and because of this imagery, he does look pretty cool. He does have this sword, he's riding a lion, and it does look very cool to some people. So I had bought this for my brother. And I bought this for him because he himself is a school teacher, and I know that that's kind of his job. He's there to lead these kids into having a better education, not just for themselves, but as society as a whole. And I thought that he could benefit from this. So I had given him this Manjushri statue, and I told him these things. I said, this is not something that you pray to. This is not something that will necessarily bring you anything. It's kind of up to you. When you look at the statue, it's more as a reminder to say, I'm in this situation, let me reflect on it, than rather react to this. Because I know that he deals with elementary school kids, and they could get under his skin. So instead of reacting to these situations by something that they've done, it's more of a reminder to reflect on that, to see what's the best way to handle the situation. It's so he can. It's more of a reminder for him to be a better person every day from then on out. And after this explanation, he got that. thanked me for giving him that statue. So where in Tibetan Buddhism, there's some mantras dedicated to him. This is similar to the visual representations in the statues that I just described. To where if you don't have the statues of Manjushri to recall that cultivation of wisdom and insight, you can look to these mantras as well. So our one mantra is Om Ara Paka Nadi, which is, again, Om Ara Paka Nadi, where each syllable itself in this mantra has a specific meaning, to where that that first one, is the beginning of all sounds in the alphabet. It's also the beginning of knowing. This is supposed to symbolize the openness and the potential for wisdom to develop before a person attaches to any fixed concepts, to any fixed ideas. It's more to be open when you experience something new. It's not to judge it right away. It's to experience it and see, all right, this is good, this is bad, this is something that I should follow, this is something that I shouldn't follow, this is something that will bring me benefit, this is something that won't benefit me or others. But the second syllable is Ra, so where this is clarity of speech and teaching. This is supposed to clear away doubt and confusion, especially when communicating with others and especially when contemplating and communicating the Dharma to other people. And then the third syllable is Pa. Pa is supposed to cultivate an awareness of interdependence. This is a nod to the concept of emptiness. This is supposed to help all who recite this mantra be aware of the causes and conditions of all things, that nothing is inherently exists on its own. There's always some cause to something, and then with every cause, there is an effect that comes with that. So the next syllable is Ka. This refers to the illumination of true reality, revealing the emptiness of all phenomena. And this is a revelation without fear, without grasping. This is supposed to, as I said, to experience things as they are, not holding fear, not holding any other emotions along with it. The next is Na, which means to strengthen retention and deepen understanding. And with this is especially helpful when studying the sutras or studying any other dharma, because these things require you to contemplate for yourselves. To where every Wednesday we do recite the Amitabha Sutra, but it's not just enough once to hear this and know everything about it. It's to read this again and again, and every time you read this, you get something different from it. You get a deeper interpretation, you get a deeper understanding of what these sutras or what these teachings are actually trying to convey. To where the last syllable is Dia, which this last syllable is supposed to represent the seed syllable of Manjushri. It carries with it the essence of penetrating wisdom and is often chanted repeatedly to anchor the mind in insight. So in meditation, it's more of a grounding to keep the mind focused on one thing. So then that goes over our talk with Manjushri. The next person we will go over is Maitreya. But Maitreya is not labeled in this sutra, in the Amitabha Sutra. He more goes by the name Ajita in the sutra, or more specifically Ajita Bodhisattva. So where Ajita itself means invincible, but the more commonly known name for Ajita is Maitreya, which Maitreya means loving friend. And Ajita acquired this name because in a past life he himself was a monk under a different Buddha, and this Buddha was Ratnachakra. So while in his Sangha, Ajita had this profound compassion for all of those around him. He more sought the happiness of others than seeking happiness for himself, to where he cared for others really before he cared for himself. So much so that he would often go hungry because he made sure that everyone else in his Sangha and everyone else in his community was fed before he himself ate. To where he was more concerned with beings living a path or traversing down a path of pure moral discipline, wisdom, and concentration, because he knew that this path would ultimately lead to a supreme happiness, and happiness that lasts, instead of something that's just temporary that you get from material things. And because of this dedication to other people and his loving kindness, that he radiated from his body, many of the gods in the heavens took notice of Ajita, and they themselves actually praised this monk, which seems kind of the opposite to where you think that people praise the gods, but in this case, he had done so much that the gods would have praised him. So much so that they gave Ajita the title Maitreya, the loving friend. And it was said in future lifetimes that Ajita will be reborn again as the Bodhisattva Maitreya, this loving friend to all people around him. To where it's now he has been reborn in the Tushita heaven. To where Maitreya is present in many of the sutras, and according to the Mahayana tradition, he is attributed to the works of the 5 books of Maitreya. And included in these books is a summary of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra that Manjushri has. But these books came into being not only because of Maitreya, but because in the 5th century there was a monk named Asangha. And Asangha himself was very much concerned and very curious about the Prajnaparamita Sutras. But even through all of his dedication, through all of his meditation sessions, he couldn't quite get what they meant. To where, so much so, he made this vow that he would contact Maitreya to get a direct teaching from him on what these Prajnaparamita Sutras meant. So Asangha made the vow to enter a retreat, and he would not leave the retreat until he had established contact with Maitreya. So he entered the retreat, and then after 3 years of this intense meditation, this intense practice, he never did make contact with Maitreya. He wasn't able to see him, he would say. So then after this 3-year period, Asangha had left this retreat, and he ventured back to his home monastery, his home temple. And then along the way, he had saw a man on the side of the road take a feather, and he tried to move this very large boulder with this feather. And he found this very profound. He goes, this is supreme dedication for a person trying to lift this large rock with this feather that will never be able to move this rock. And he saw this impossible task as actually something inspirational, something that, so much so that he's like, what am I doing? I need to go back to the retreat to go establish this contact with Maitreya. So he did, because of this inspiration. But then time would go by, and he would lose this inspiration, and thus he would go venture back to his home temple. But always, every time he left the retreat, he would see someone performing another impossible task, and he would get re-inspired by this again. So he would have these back and forth ventures. He'd go to the monastery, he'd go to the retreat because he was inspired, then he would leave, and then he would see someone doing this impossible task and then get inspired again, and thus go back and forth and back and forth. So then after a 12-year period, he thought that this was no good anymore. He called it quits for good. So then on this final journey back to his home temple, he had stumbled upon a dog, a very sickly dog, to where it had all these wounds on its body, and then one wound in particular had these maggots coming out of it. And to where he felt this great compassion, he wanting to help this animal. But not only the dog, he wanted to look after the maggots themselves, because they themselves are sentient beings too, and he was wanting to look out anything that was living. So then within this compassion, he took a knife and took off a part of his own skin. And he had done this to remove the maggots from the wound of the dog to put into this flesh that he had just cut off from himself. But he didn't want to pick out the maggots for fear that he would kill the maggots. So what he had done is that he would go up to the wound, suck out a maggot with his tongue, and then place it onto this flesh. To where he found this disgusting, so he would do this eyes closed. He would come up to this wound, take out a maggot, put it in this flesh, and then go back and forth until eventually, when he came to the wound, he didn't feel any more maggots. He finally opened his eyes, and before him was not the sickly dog anymore, but Maitreya himself. Maitreya had finally come to him. He finally established this contact. To where Asanga had told Maitreya, said, "Where were you the whole time when I was looking for you? I had spent 12 years looking for you, and I never was able to find you." So the Manjushri had replied to him that he was by his side the entire time. But then Asanga's delusions kept him from seeing Maitreya. He was sort of clouded to where he couldn't see him, though he was right in front of him the entire time. So where the Maitreya had explained to Asanga that in this final act of compassion, that veil was finally lifted, and he was able to finally see Maitreya. And then this encounter, Maitreya had taken Asanga back into Tushita heaven, to his Pure Land, to thus teach him directly on what the meaning of the Prajnaparamita Sutras meant. And throughout this teaching, this is where the 5 books came from. Asanga then authored the 5 books of Maitreya, to where those 5 books are Ornament of Realizations, Ornament of Universal Vehicle Scriptures, Analysis of the Jeweled Matrix, Discrimination Between Center and Extremes, and the 5th book being Discrimination Between Phenomena and Numana. So where I'll take one of the excerpts from the book of Analysis of the Jeweled Matrix, because it directly goes into the journey of what Asanga was doing. So where the excerpt goes, "Under the floor of some poor man's house lies the uncorroded treasure. But because he does not know of its existence, he does not know that he is rich. Similarly, inside one's mind lies truth itself, firm and unfading. Yet because beings see it not, they experience a constant stream of misery. The pauper with a treasure buried beneath his shack does not say he has a treasure, for he does not know it exists. Likewise, a treasure of truth lies within the house of every mind, yet we live impoverished through lack of it. Therefore, the seers take a pure birth in the land so that this treasure may be known." So that's a metaphor for Asanga's journey, is that he had the answers that he was looking for the whole time. Maitreya was right there, but because he couldn't see him, he couldn't see him because of these delusions that he had. He still had some afflictions that he was dealing with, and he still had attachment to views. He wasn't fully open. He wasn't aware of what was right in front of him. Where that's the analogy of the man with the treasure, with the man with the house with the treasure in his basement. He's rich, but he doesn't know it. So where that's the most of the excerpt, but the last line of the excerpt goes, "Therefore the seers take a pure birth in the world so that this treasure may be known." This can be taken that these bodhisattvas stay in the world to teach living beings that the answers that they seek are really right in front of them. It's just that if they're willing to open their eyes and see it for themselves. It's where that's much harder to do than, it's much easier said than done to do that, because it's not easy to look inside. It's where a lot of people are, they're connected to views that they're not willing to let go of. But when you finally let go of everything, you're able to see what really exists. You're able to see what's really left there, to where it could be this treasure that you're actually looking for. So where now, how Manjushri was foremost in transcendental wisdom, Maitreya is foremost in patience and compassion. And so much so that no matter what happens to him, whether he's being beaten, whether he's being scolded, or whether he's being berated by others around him, he always has a calm and collected complexion. He's always compassionate towards his offenders in return. So where he doesn't give back that anger, he doesn't give back that hatred. Though people berate him, he doesn't do the same to them, because he has that insight that Manjushri does, is that these people that are tormenting him are also being tormented themselves. And to give back any of this anger, to give back any of this hatred, is ultimately going to lead himself to more suffering, but then to this offender to more suffering. And so that no matter how obnoxious that living beings are, Maitreya, he protects them. He protects them more so than he would his own children, because he doesn't discriminate. And because of this discrimination, his compassion and loving concern are boundless and limitless. He doesn't see a poor beggar. He doesn't see a royal king. He just sees someone in need of help. He sees someone with potential. And then Maitreya had written this verse down, and in order to develop a compassionate heart, you need to first develop patience. To where this verse goes, the old fool wrapped in rugged clothes, his belly filled with gruel. He mends old socks to keep himself warm and lives on chance, old fool. A scolding makes the fool smile sweetly, while a beating makes him sleepy. Spit on his face and he lets it dry, and he saves his strength and energy. His calm, a peace past ridicule, gets him the jewel within the wonderful. Now that you've heard this song today, why don't you practice the way? Something happens and he reflects it. When it passes, he is still. Everywhere according with conditions as the years and months go by, minding your own business as the time passes. In movement there is stillness, in stillness there is movement. Both movement and stillness are still and moving. This person shows the image of someone with supreme patience, because in order to not react in these sorts of ways, it takes a lot of restraint, it takes a lot of patience. To where the normal person, when they're smacked on the back of the head, they'll immediately go, why did you do that? The normal person would get anger, they get hot-headed, that this would affect them. The same with being berated, telling them something hurtful. They would take the immediate offense to this, to where the old fool is patient. The old fool is not, he's not affected by this phenomena, because ultimately he knows that these don't affect him. To where there's Sutra to where the Buddha is getting berated, to where he then says, if I don't take this ridicule, if I don't take these gifts, who are they? Or whose are they? To where ultimately it's said that this stuff still belongs to the offender, because the Buddha has not taken these gifts, they're ultimately not his. Same can be said for the fool, because he does not take the hatred is not his. He's not affected by this hatred, by this anger. And thus, with this patience, he understands the suffering of the individual, and instead of acting in anger, he acts with compassion towards them instead. And then now it is finally said that Maitreya is prophesied to be the next Buddha in the Dharma ending age. And this Dharma ending age is categorized by beings that live better and longer lifetimes, because living beings are seen to live longer and healthier. The concept of death is a little foreign to them. They're living so long and doing so much that death is it's too far away to be worried about. And in these societies, because they've advanced so much that the pleasure is really attainable, any pleasure is attainable. It's really at the fingertips of anyone that wants it. But then within this, there's something missing from existence. Through all this pleasure, yes, there is happiness wherever that is seen, but there's a sort of empty existence about it. It's not a happiness that typically lasts. And the meaning in the lives of these beings, because they live a long time, it's kind of it's an abysmal existence. It's mostly just pleasure, and there's no meaning behind any of that. So much so that the teachings of the elders and the teachings of the Buddhas have been abandoned, and it's said that Buddhism will eventually die out in these Dharma ending ages. To where some say that the first sutra to go at the beginning of this age and to be forgotten is the Shurangama Sutra. To where at this point in time, beings are living this aimless existence. And then at this time, it is said that Maitreya will then be born in this time period. He will be born as a prince, similar to Shakyamuni Buddha was. And he will live this existence and see that there's ultimately no meaning behind this. These are just empty pleasures. There's nothing past any of this. So then it said he'll renounce that royal life, that life of pleasure, just like Shakyamuni Buddha did. But not taking 6 years to get enlightened, he takes more of just one day to be enlightened. And through this enlightenment, he'll then bring the Dharma back to the world. This Dharma will then give people a reason to live. They'll see that this aimless life does have, there is guidance in it. There is a goal at the end of it. And then to bring it back to one of the Arhats, if you remember, the Arhat Mahakashyapa, when the Shakyamuni Buddha died, he made the vow that he would enter samadhi in a cave at the foot of a mountain in China, and he'll sit there until the Buddha Maitreya will be born, being that physical connection between Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya Buddha, to where when he's finally reborn, Mahakashyapa will then exit his samadhi and then gift the robes of Shakyamuni Buddha to Maitreya, thus being that physical connection. And though it is said that Maitreya will be reborn in the very distant future, his presence can be felt now in the sense of loving kindness, in the sense of the metta meditation, to always be looking out for those around you, to always be wishing, well, not wishing, but to act. Because it's not enough to just wish for someone to be better. It's kind of within your own hands, to where you can say all you want, but until you actually put something into practice, until you put something into action, nothing's really going to happen. So in that act of acting compassionately towards others, being patient with others when they're going through a hard time or when they're suffering, this is kind of invoking the image of Maitreya. This is you experiencing those qualities of that bodhisattva, of that Buddha to be. To where I said before with Manjushri, it's not enough to just say, Maitreya, please help me get these teachings, help me realize this stuff. This is something you do for yourself. It's something to aspire to, not necessarily something to ask for. It's not something to pray for. It's something to put into your practice. It's something to do yourself. Because ultimately, they are just teachers. They're not supreme, superior beings that are making things just happen all the time. The action happens with you. So this concludes my talk about these two bodhisattvas. So then the next two talks will then go over the last two bodhisattvas, and then Chakra, which is the king among gods. We'll go over that in our next sutra study session. So until then, if anyone in the audience has a question, I will gladly try to answer it. And if I can't, I will revert to Taekwon Tree.
Say mantra again that we mentioned in
Yes. Yeah, Manjushri's mantra, the Tibetan Buddhist mantra. That mantra is Om Ara Paka Nadi. Or I can write it on the board if that's helpful. Oops. I may be pronouncing the last syllable wrong. I interpret it as D, but I'm not entirely sure how you interpret that vowel in there. Om Ara Paka Nadi, the mantra of Manjushri. You're welcome. And if there's no more questions, I will give it back to Taekwon Tree.
Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you, Quang Hian. Speaking of the mantra, at least the version I know is Om Arapa Sa Nadi. Om Arapa Sa Nadi, or Om Arapa Sa Nadi Hri. But this is also coming from the Tibetan Buddhist side. They're all correct. It doesn't matter how it's said, right? There's no magic, it's not a magic spell, right? So it doesn't really matter how it's pronounced or said or what version you use. The end game of any mantra is about the intention behind what it's the intention behind it, not the actual words. Yes, there's that. The sutra, one of the sutras that Quang mentioned, the Vimalakirti, the Desa Sutra, or just the Vimalakirti, is really a pretty awesome sutra. It's probably, as far as I can recall, it's one of the only sutras I've ever read that actually made me laugh. The sutra itself is very much my style. It's very direct. There's some humor in it. There's some sarcasm in it, and so I love it. It's one of the sutras that I'll eventually teach on. It's a great sutra, and it's not that long. It is longer than the Amitabha Sutra, but it is well worth the read. But it is about the late person named Vimalakirti, who was considered a living bodhisattva, right? He was, in the sutra, he kind of embodies the ideal bodhisattva, right? Living in the world without any attachment to the world. As I mentioned, quite often as practitioners, we need to be in the world, but we don't have to be of the world, right? Of the world literally just means not being attached to the worldly desires and worldly afflictions and affiliations that a normal person may have. But in the sutra itself, right, it covers a lot of different topics, like Quang mentioned, emptiness, right, non-duality, compassion, and the universality of awakening, right? That all beings have the potential for Buddhahood. And there's many different debates in the sutra, right? The biggest and longest section is the one of Manjushri. But one of the other kind of prominent scenes in the sutra that's mentioned, if I remember correctly, is during one of the visits that the monks had with Vimalakirti at his house. There was a time in the section, the monk that was debating with Shariputra, and they were debating on essentially non-duality, right? And in the scene, a goddess had appeared in Vimalakirti's room, and she was debating with Shariputra. And then all of a sudden, she had changed her appearance to kind of emphasize that regardless of your appearance, man, woman, right, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because all beings have the potentiality of enlightenment, of Buddhahood. I don't remember the exact context, but I'm assuming from my recollection of the story, they were debating on, because in some canonical text, right, a person has to be very controversial. Has to be a man in order to attain enlightenment, right? We don't believe in that stuff. But if I recall correctly, that was the debate, right? And that's how the goddess had appeared in changed form and had rebuked Shariputra, right, saying that you're pretty dumb. The same kind of story or context is also in the Lotus Sutra, right? In the chapter of the daughter of the Dragon King, right, who was 8 years old. It was like, and I think it was also Manjushri actually in the chapter, stating that how you have to go through these processes and transformations to become enlightened. And this princess appeared and was like, watch this, right? And she had transformed into a man in all these different forms, and as a bodhisattva, as a Buddha, and had said that your thinking of how things should be is incorrect. which again, is why I find this sutra kind of funny, because it's just calling these bodhisattvas out, right? These bodhisattvas who are highly enlightened are being called out by a layperson. Just to me, that's hilarious. But the other kind of feature of the story that Vimalakirti was saying was also talking about Pure Lands, or how beings create Pure Lands. And obviously, as we practice and learn and chant the Amitabha Sutra, it's all about Amitabha's Pure Land, right? Which seems as this fantastical, out of worldly place, right? Because it's the description of it is pretty far-fetched, right? But Vimalakirti is reminding us that what is asking us, think about what a Pure Land is. Like, think of what you think heaven is, right? And let's just use the word heaven in this case. Think of what you think heaven is, right? Actual question, what is heaven? Golden gates, pure, clean, right? No dirtiness, that's everything you want, whatever it may be. But Vimalakirti was emphasizing that you don't have to go anywhere to have a Pure Land. You don't have to attain something in order to get to a Pure Land. A pure mind is what creates a Pure Land. As I mentioned before, the mindset of an enlightened person isn't something that's transformative in the sense that you're being taken somewhere, right? Nirvana isn't a destination. Nirvana is just the way you see things, right? So a pure land is simply a pure mind. If you see things with non-duality, with compassion, with the sight of emptiness, with the distinction, not the distinction, but with the eradication of self and all the other defilements, right? There's no room to interpret good or bad, right and wrong, beautiful or ugly, male, female, et cetera, right? These distinctions don't exist, right? This is why Vimalakirti answered Manjushi's question with silence, because words cannot emphasize or cannot describe what nirvana is. It cannot describe what emptiness is. It cannot describe what prajnaparamita is, right? There are sutras and there's discourses and there's teachings to try to, as closely as possible, relate what these concepts are. But words are not enough. It is definitely an experiential thing, right? And one of the Zen examples of it here is when a person is trying to describe like an orange to a blind person, right? The moment your mouth opens in the description, it's already wrong. Because your description of an orange is completely your own perception of what that orange looks like. The way you see the color is 100% unique to you, because not everybody sees the same color. We already know that scientifically, not everybody sees the exact same color. Not everybody can smell the exact same thing. Not everybody can taste the same thing. So the moment you try to describe something to someone, you're already wrong. And so that's what nirvana is. That's what enlightenment is it's the silence of things. It is the true seeing of things as they are, right? Okay, he stopped talking. But the other fun, it's not a fun topic. The other, I guess it could be a fun topic, but the Dharma ending age, which there's a lot of debate on what that actually means, right? And depending on your tradition, some traditions have specific time frames, which to me doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you put a time frame on anything, right? That defeats the whole purpose of duality. But in Japanese Tiantai, right, like our tradition is Tiantai. Our tradition is the Chinese, Vietnamese version of Tiantai. Japanese is Tiandai. But their version of the Dharma ending age, or their time frame of the Dharma ending age, is, let's see. So the first 500 years after the Buddha dies is like the glory ages, right? So when the Dharma is at its most perfect and most complete. And I believe it's the next either 1,500 or 2,500 years is when the Dharma is not being defiled, but not being holistically there, right? There's
the counterfeit age.
Kind of like a counterfeit age, right? There's some true Dharma, right? You take some true Dharma and you add some nonsense to it, or you pick and choose what's right and wrong, or what you want to practice or teach or whatnot. And then the last 500 years after, whatever this period is the Dharma ending age. Personally, Dharma ending age is when the world ends. My Buddhist cosmology isn't that important, right? It's not nobody cares, right? It doesn't, nobody should care, right? I don't really care. But my interpretation of even like the word kalpa, right? And we chant about kalpas all the time, right? Kalpa is just this, not infinite, but this an extremely large amount of time, right? To me, a kalpa is the age of the universe, because we already know that the universe, there was a beginning, right? And eventually it'll die. And so that cycle is one kalpa. So to me, the Maitreya Buddha won't come again until our current kalpa age ends. So the universe needs to disappear. That's one version of my belief. My version number 2 is a little bit more micro. So instead of the entire universe, it's just like our galaxy, right? Because even galaxies are born and die too, right? Whether they die off because they expand too much and they just, fade away, or they merge with other galaxies, or whatever it may be. But I think it's a fun thought theory to kind of think of what that means, right? Or when the Dharma ending age is, right? It's not important necessarily, but it's a fun thought experiment to really think about. I'm like, what does this actually mean? Because according to the sutras, the Dharma has to completely disappear before Maitreya comes back. I'm like, all right, I'm bringing it back, right? It's kind of like bringing the 60s back, right? Or some trend from the 60s back. So I just think it's going to be a while, right? It's a very distant future before the Dharma ends. There are even traditions that are wholly around Maitreya. If I remember correctly, it's called Maitreyanas, Maitreyana, right? Maitri, this means joy or love or happiness, and yana means vehicle, right? It's a vehicle of Maitreya. So these traditions are using Maitreya Bodhisattva or Maitreya Buddha as the main figurehead of the tradition, right? They're just like the Pure Land tradition, where the Pure Landers practice in order to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. Maitreyans, that's not a real word, it's made up, but Maitreyans do the same thing so they can be reborn in Tushita heaven, Tushita heaven, so that they can descend with Maitreya when he descends into the world sometime in the future, to be with him, right? Because to be in the presence of a living Buddha is one of the most grandest things you can ever want. At one point in my practice, I was a Maitreyan, because I was like, you know what? I want to see what this guy's about. I want to be in the presence of a living Buddha, or better yet, an attendant to one. Could you imagine? Holy moly. But then I decided I don't want to live that long. I need to end this as soon as possible. I'm not waiting until the universe dies in order to come back. Especially when you're at Tushita heaven, right? The lifespan of beings are beyond our own calculation. I think in Tushita's, it's one of the highest realms, highest heavenly realms, and it's something like one human or one Earth day is like 100,000 days in Tushita, right? So it's a long time. I don't want to do that. I need this to end as quickly as possible. The cycle of samsara, that is. Okay, any other questions? Beautiful. Then I will see everyone hopefully tomorrow service. Also want to quickly remind everyone that our Ulambana holiday ceremony celebration is on September 7th. It's a Sunday. It'll be at 10 a.m. There will be no other services that day except for Ulambana. And I don't have an exact date, but actually, hold on. I may have an exact date. October 11. Pending. October 11, for the most part, will probably be our half-day intensive meditation retreat. This will be 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So mark your calendars for that. And I haven't chosen a date for our winter retreat yet, but it will be the beginning of December, most likely the second Saturday. Since that first weekend in December, we'll be celebrating our Venerable Abbot's birthday, or continuation day. So typically we have our retreats the following weekend, so it'll probably be that. I don't have those dates yet exactly, but we still have time, so that's all right. All right, if there's no other questions, then we will transfer the merits and close our class. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them enlightenment. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.